The first thing I heard that morning was not the wind moving through the pine trees or the old boards of our cabin settling in the cold. It was a woman screaming from the bottom of our private gravel road. You have 10 minutes to open that cabin for inspection. When I stepped onto the porch, I saw her marching up the hill in a bright red jacket, waving a clipboard like it was a court order. Behind her came 2 HOA board members, one filming on his phone, and a contractor in a white pickup truck with a ladder rack and demolition tools in the back. The woman's name was Marlene Pierce, president of the Pine Hollow Estates HOA. We did not live in Pine Hollow Estates. We had never joined that HOA, and our cabin had been sitting on that ridge since before their gated community was even a drawing on a developer's desk. But Marlene didn't care. She pointed at our porch, our windows, the fresh boards stacked near the door, and then at my wife, Emily, like we were trespassers on our own land. "This structure is visible from our entrance," she snapped. "That gives the association authority to inspect it. If you refuse access, we'll start daily fines, report the cabin to the county, and have that illegal porch removed." Remember looking at the contractor behind her. He was not surprised. He was studying our cabin like he had already been hired to tear part of it down. Emily stood beside me. Quiet at first. Too quiet. This cabin had belonged to her father. He built it with his own hands, board by board, long before Marlene ever bought a house behind a gate and called herself president of anything. I told Marlene she was on private property and needed to leave. She laughed. "Sweetheart," she said to my wife, "old family stories. Don't override recorded restrictions." That was the moment Emily turned around. I walked inside and came back holding a weatherproof folder from the old metal cabinet by the fireplace. She didn't yell. She didn't argue. She simply pulled out one yellowed deed, unfolded it across the hood of Marlene's golf cart, and tapped one paragraph with her finger. Marlene leaned in with that smug smile still on her face. Then the smile disappeared. Because that deed did not just prove our cabin was outside HOA control. It proved something much worse for her. The HOA stone entrance pillar, welcome sign, landscaping wall, and part of the road they had been using for years were sitting inside a recorded access easement tied to my wife's family land. Marlene had come screaming up the hill to inspect our cabin. By the end of that month, the county would force her HOA to tear out its own entrance, cancel every fine, pay our survey and legal costs, and explain to an entire room of angry homeowners why their president had started a property fight she was never legally allowed to win. Before Marlene Pierce ever came screaming up our gravel road, the cabin was the one place in our lives that still felt untouched. It was not fancy. It was not some luxury mountain lodge with floor-tiling windows and a hot tub on the deck. It was a small cedar cabin with a stone chimney, a tin roof that popped when the temperature changed, and old pine floors that creaked in different places depending on the weather. In the winter, the whole place smelled like wood smoke and cold earth. In the summer, you could sit on the porch and hear nothing but cicadas, birds, and the creek running somewhere down the hill. To anyone else, it probably looked outdated. To my wife, Emily, it was home. Her father built it almost 40 years earlier, back when that part of the county was mostly timberland and old farm parcels. He was not a developer. He was not a wealthy investor. He was a cabinet maker who saved for years, bought a rough piece of land near the ridge, and spent weekends hauling lumber up a dirt road in the back of an old Ford truck. Emily used to tell me stories about him, measuring every board twice, arguing with the wood stove, and letting her hammer crooked nails into scrap pieces when she was 6 years old. Her mother planted wildflowers along the edge of the porch. Her father carved Emily's initials into the underside of one of the steps, where no one could see them unless they knew exactly where to look. After her parents passed, that cabin became more than property. It became the last physical place where Emily could still feel close to them. Every time we drove up there, she would get quiet for a few minutes at the gate. Like she was preparing herself to step back into another part of her life. We never wanted trouble. We were not trying to build a resort. We were not renting the cabin out every weekend. We were not throwing parties, blocking roads, or bothering anyone in the subdivision below us. Most of the year, the cabin sat empty except for a few weekends when we came up to repair something. Clean the gutters, split firewood, or drink coffee on the porch while the fog lifted off the trees. When the repairs started, we did everything carefully. The porch boards were rotting. The roof had a leak near the chimney. A few window frames had softened from years of mountain rain. So before we touched anything major, I went to the county office, pulled the parcel records, checked the building requirements, and asked exactly what needed a permit. We hired a licensed electrician to replace unsafe wiring. We kept the same footprint. We did not expand the cabin. We did not add a second story. We did not touch the septic system. We kept receipts for every board, every inspection, every contractor visit. That was how Emily wanted it. Clean. Legal, respectful, no shortcuts. The only thing near us was Pine Hollow Estates, a gated HOA community at the bottom of the hill. It had not existed when Emily's father built the cabin. Years after he bought the land, a developer purchased the valley below, cut roads through it, put in stone entrance pillars, and sold the lots as a private mountain neighborhood with exclusive views and architectural harmony. We were not inside that community. Our cabin sat above it, on a separate parcel with its own deed, its own tax record, and an old recorded access easement that allowed us to use the gravel road running from the county road up to our property. That easement was older than the HOA itself. Emily's father had kept every document in a weatherproof folder inside a metal cabinet beside the fireplace. For years, no one cared. The old HOA board barely acknowledged us. Sometimes residents would wave when we drove through the lower access road. Sometimes a delivery driver would get confused and call us from the gate. But there were no fights, no letters, no threats. We stayed out of their business, and they stayed out of ours. Then Marlene Pierce became HOA president. At first, I did not know her name. I only noticed that things changed. The gate camera was replaced. New signs appeared. The landscaping around the entrance became sharper, cleaner, more expensive. HOA started sending glossy newsletters about protecting community value and preserving the Pine Hollow aesthetic. Then the first letter arrived. It was addressed to cabin owner adjacent to Pine Hollow Estates. Not to me, not to Emily, not even to the correct parcel address. The letter said our cabin was visible from the community entrance and needed to be brought into compliance with HOA appearance standards. It mentioned exterior color, roofing material, porch condition, and unapproved construction activity. I thought it was a mistake. I wrote back politely. I explained that our cabin was not part of Pine Hollow Estates. We were not HOA members, and that our repairs were permitted through the county where required. I included the parcel number and told them any future questions could be directed to us in writing. 2 weeks later, a second letter came. This one was colder. It said failure to submit our cabin for architectural review could result in fines, enforcement action, and referral to county authorities. Emily read it at the kitchen table 3 times without saying anything. Then she folded it slowly and set it beside the old deed folder. That was the first time I saw fear behind her eyes. Not fear of Marlene personally. Fear of losing control over the one place her parents had left her. Fear that some board of strangers in polo shirts and name tags could take a family cabin, slap a violation number on it, and bury us under enough paperwork to make us give up. I told Emily it would be fine. I told her documents mattered, deeds mattered, recorded easements mattered, her county permits mattered, and HOA could not just point at land it disliked and claim authority over it. I believed that, but I also underestimated how far someone like Marlene would go. Once she decided being wrong would make her look weak. Neighbor from Pine Hollow, a retired teacher named Mrs. Alvarez, quietly called Emily one evening. She said our cabin had been brought up during an HOA meeting. Marlene had called it an eyesore above the entrance and said it created a compliance problem for the entire community. Someone asked whether the cabin was actually under HOA authority, and Marlene allegedly replied, "Not yet, but there are ways to pressure cooperation." Mrs. Alvarez sent us an audio recording from that meeting. Emily listened to it once, then turned it off. For a long moment, the cabin was silent, except for the refrigerator humming and rain tapping against the kitchen window. Then she said, "My dad protected this place his whole life. We're not going to let them bully us out of it, because they don't like seeing old wood from their pretty gate." That night, I started a folder on my laptop. I saved every letter, every envelope, every email, every photo of the property, every permit document, and every tax record I could find. Emily pulled the old metal cabinet open and began sorting through her father's papers page by page. I did not know it yet, But one of those pages would become the reason Marlene lost control of the entire fight. And if you have ever dealt with an HOA, a neighbor, or anyone who thinks your property line is just a suggestion, you probably already know why we saved everything. Stories like this are exactly why people should read their deeds, keep their records, and never assume the loudest person in the room actually has the law on their side. Because by the time Marlene decided to drive up our private road in person, she thought she was coming to discipline a couple of stubborn cabin owners. She had no idea she was walking straight into a paper trail. Her own HOA had no way to survive. By the time Marlene Pierce came to the cabin in person, she had already spent 3 weeks trying to make us feel like we were doing something wrong. Every few days, another email showed up. Sometimes it came from the HOA secretary. Sometimes it came from Marlene herself. The wording was always dressed up to sound official, but the message never changed. Submit the cabin for inspection. Stop all repairs. Provide access. Accept HOA authority. Comply before fines begin. I answered the first few messages calmly. I attached the parcel number again. I attached the county permit again. Explained again that our cabin was not within Pine Hollow Estates, that we were not members of the association, and that no one from the HOA had permission to enter our land. After that, I stopped replying. That was when the letters became notices. One envelope had the words "Final Warning" printed in red across the top. Another included a fine schedule that started at $500 per day. The last one claimed the HOA had received multiple resident complaints about construction activity, visual blight, and unsafe access conditions near the community entrance. Emily read that phrase twice. Unsafe access conditions. It was a lie, but it was also a warning. They were no longer just complaining about the cabin. They were trying to build a story around the road. Our gravel road began at the edge of the county road, crossed near the Pine Hollow entrance, and climbed the ridge to our cabin. It had been there long before the stone pillars, the gate camera, the manicured shrubs, and the polished bronze HOA sign. Emily's father used that road when it was still rutted dirt and weeds. The easement existed because without that road, the cabin parcel would be landlocked. Marlene knew that road mattered. So when she showed up that Saturday morning, she did not park at the bottom and walk up politely. She drove straight past the private road sign in a golf cart with the HOA logo on the side, followed by a board member in an SUV and a contractor in a pickup truck. I heard them before I saw them. The golf cart motor whined against the slope. Tires spat gravel against the underbrush. Marlene came around the bend, too fast for that narrow road, and stopped so hard in front of our porch that dust rolled across the stack of cedar boards we had just unloaded. Emily and I were both outside. I had a pry bar in my hand because I had been removing one of the rotten porch boards. Emily was kneeling near the steps, sorting screws into a coffee can, the way her father used to. We froze for a second, not because we were afraid, but because the scene was so absurd that my brain needed a moment to accept it. Marlene stepped out like she owned the mountain. She wore white sneakers that were already getting dirty, a bright red jacket, oversized sunglasses, and a laminated HOA badge clipped to her collar. Behind her, a man named Todd from the board lifted his phone and started recording before anyone said hello. The contractor stayed near his truck with his arms crossed, looking at our porch like he was estimating how long it would take to rip it off. Oh, Marlene raised her clipboard. "You have 10 minutes to open this structure for inspection," she said. I looked at Emily, then I looked back at Marlene. "No," I said, "you need to leave. This is private property." She smiled, like she had been waiting for me to say that. "Refusal has consequences," she said. "This cabin is visible from Pine Hollow Estates, and your unapproved construction is affecting community standards. We're here to document violations and determine corrective action." I told her again that Pine Hollow Estates had no authority over the cabin. Marlene flipped a page on her clipboard. "According to our architectural guidelines, any structure impacting the visual character of the entrance corridor is subject to review." "That is an HOA rule," I said, "for HOA property." "It is a community rule," she snapped, "and your property impacts our community." Emily stood up then. Her hands were dusty from the porch boards. Her voice stayed calm, but I could hear the edge under it. "You're standing on my family's land," she said. "You were told in writing not to come here." Marlene turned toward her slowly, like Emily had just annoyed her by speaking. "Sweetheart, As we not here to debate old family stories, she said. We here because this structure is out of compliance, and if you force us to escalate, you will not like what happens next. For a second, all I heard was the wind pushing through the trees. Emily's face changed. Not dramatically. She did not yell. She did not cry. But something in her expression went flat and cold. Marlene had no idea what she had just stepped onto her. The cabin was an eyesore above the entrance. To Emily, it was the last place on earth where her father's hands still felt present. I moved one step closer to the edge of the porch. You are not entering the cabin, I said. You are not inspecting the cabin, and your contractor is not touching anything on this property. The contractor looked away. Marlene did not. She reached into her folder and pulled out a packet of papers. This is a notice of violation. This is a demand for access. This is a preliminary fine schedule. In this, she held up a blurry printed map with a red circle drawn around the ridge. Shows the affected area under HOA concern. I almost laughed when I saw it, not because it was funny, but because it was so weak. It was not a survey. It was not a recorded plat. It looked like a marketing map from a real estate brochure. The kind developers print to make neighborhoods look cleaner and more connected than they are. That map has no legal meaning, I said. Marlene's smile sharpened. You can explain that to the county when we report the cabin as an unapproved structure. Emily pointed to the permit posted near the door. The county already approved the repair work. County approval is not HOA approval, Marlene said. We are not in your HOA. That is your interpretation. No, Emily said. That is our deed. Marlene ignored her and started walking toward the steps. I stepped down from the porch and blocked the way without touching her. She stopped less than 2 feet in front of me. Todd's phone was still recording. I could feel exactly what they wanted. They wanted me angry. They wanted me loud. They wanted one bad moment they could clip, email, and present at a meeting as proof that we were hostile property owners creating a safety problem. So I kept my voice low. Marlene, I am telling you clearly you do not have permission to enter this cabin or continue walking around this property. Leave now. She looked past me toward Todd's camera. Let the record show, she said, that the owner is refusing a lawful inspection. It is not lawful, Emily said. Marlene turned her head. Then you should have no problem proving that after enforcement begins. That was when she motioned to the contractor. He walked forward from the truck and stopped near the pile of cedar boards. There was a thick-set man in work boots with a tape measure clipped to his belt and a pencil tucked behind one ear. His truck door had the name Ridgeway Property Services printed on it. I had seen that name before on HOA maintenance signs near the Pine Hollow entrance. Marlene pointed at our porch. Mr. Ridgeway is here to assess the non-compliant exterior addition, she said. If the board authorizes corrective removal, we need to know the scope. Emily stared at her. Corrective removal? She repeated. The porch extension, Marlene said. It is not an extension. Emily said. We are replacing rotten boards. Marlene looked at the exposed joists and gave a small shrug. That will be determined after inspection. The contractor shifted his weight and finally spoke. It looks like I could take the front section down in half a day, he said. Maybe less if we bring another guy. The sentence hit the air like a brick. Emily took one step toward him. I put my hand out gently, not to stop her from defending herself, but to remind her that Todd was still filming. She looked at the phone, then at me, and I saw her pull every bit of anger back behind her eyes. No one is taking anything down, she said. Marlene's voice became almost cheerful, then cooperate. That was the real Marlene. Not a confused board president, not a neighbor trying to solve a problem. A person who believed pressure was the same thing as authority. She began walking around the side of the cabin, narrating for Todd's video. Visible deterioration on porch surface. Unapproved material storage. Exterior color inconsistent with community palette. Possible safety hazard near entrance corridor. Refusal of access by occupants. I followed at a distance. Recording on my own phone now. This is private property, I said into the video. Today is Saturday, October 12th at 9:22 in the morning. Marlene Pierce of the Pine Hollow Estates, HOA, has been told to leave. She is continuing to walk around the property without permission. HOA board member Todd Bennett is recording. A contractor from Ridgeway Property Services is present. No one here has authorization to inspect, enter, alter, or remove any part of this cabin. Marlene stopped and turned. Oh, good, she said. Record everything. It will save us time later. You are trespassing, I said. She laughed under her breath. People love that word when they don't understand association law. Emily's hand tightened around the coffee can full of screws. Marlene walked to the side window and leaned close to look inside. That was the first time my voice rose. Step away from the window, she straightened slowly. I am documenting visible conditions. You are looking into a private cabin after being told to leave. Todd lowered his phone for a second. Even he seemed uncomfortable. But Marlene was too committed to stop. She returned to the front of the cabin and placed the packet of papers on one of our porch boards. You have until Monday at 5 p.m. to provide full access, submit all exterior work for review, and agree in writing that the association has oversight of this structure as part of the entrance corridor, she said. If you refuse, fines begin Tuesday. We will also consider blocking use of the lower road until compliance is resolved. That was the part she should never have said. Emily looked at her. You're threatening to block the only legal access to our property. I am saying, Marlene replied, that access through a managed community is a privilege. It is a recorded easement, Emily said. Marlene picked up her clipboard and smiled again. We'll see. Then she turned to leave, but not before giving the contractor one last look. It was quick, almost nothing. So did Emily. Ridgway lingered near the road, staring at the private road sign. I filmed his truck as he backed down the gravel lane. I filmed the HOA golf cart. I filmed Todd S. SUV. I filmed the tire tracks in the dust and the packet of papers Marlene had left behind like a threat dressed up as procedure. When they were finally gone, the mountain went quiet again. But it did not feel peaceful anymore. Emily sat down on the porch step and stared at the road. For a moment, she looked like a little girl waiting for her father to come up the hill in that old Ford truck, carrying lumber, coffee, and some plan to fix whatever broken. Then she stood up, wiped her hands on her jeans, and said, "Get the trail camera cards." I had almost forgotten about them. Years earlier, after a bear got into the trash and dragged a bag of coffee grounds halfway into the woods, we mounted 3 trail cameras around the cabin. One faced the gravel road. One faced the porch. One faced the bend, near the private road sign. I pulled the memory cards that afternoon and loaded them on my laptop at the kitchen table. The first clips showed deer, then raccoons, then rain. Then at 8:43, the night before Marlene's visit, headlights washed across the trees. A white pickup truck came slowly up our private road, Ridgway Property Services. The contractor had not arrived that morning for the first time. He had been there the night before. On the next camera, he stepped out with a flashlight and walked straight to our porch. He measured the front boards. He photographed the permit in the window. He took pictures of the side of the cabin. Then he pulled a can of orange marking paint from his truck and then sprayed 2 small lines near the edge of the porch frame. Emily did not say a word. I clicked the third camera. That angle showed the bend in the road, where her father's old sign stood between 2 pine trees. Private road, no HOA access. Ridgway walked up to it, shined his flashlight on it, removed a tool from his pocket, and loosened the screws. He did not steal the sign. He did something sneakier. He turned it just enough that anyone driving up from the HOA entrance would not see the warning until they were already on the road. The room went cold. Marlene had not come to inspect our cabin. She had sent her contractor first, under cover of darkness, to prepare for the story she planned to tell the next morning. And now we had it all on camera. The first thing Emily did after we watched that trail camera footage was close the laptop. She did it slowly, with both hands flat on the table, like she was afraid if she moved too fast, all the anger in the room would finally break loose. For almost a full minute, neither of us spoke. Outside, the rain had started again. It tapped against the cabin windows and ran down the glass in crooked lines. The same windows Marlene had leaned into that morning, like she had every right to peer inside. The same porch Ridgway had measured in the dark. The same road Emily's father had protected with a hand-painted sign that someone had twisted just far enough to make it easier to pretend it was never there. I wanted to call Marlene immediately. I wanted to tell her we had the footage. I wanted to send the clips to every resident in Pine Hollow Estates and let them watch their HOA contractors sneaking around our cabin at night with a flashlight and marking paint. Emily looked at me and shook her head before I said a word. "No," she said. "We don't warn them." That was when I realized she was no longer just hurt. She was focused. We reopened the laptop and copied every video file from the trail cameras onto 2 separate drives. Then we uploaded them to cloud storage, timestamps included. I took screenshots of every important frame. Ridgeway S truck coming up the private road, his license plate, his face in the porch camera, his hand holding the orange spray paint, the moment he turned the private road sign, and the little flash of his tool against the screws. Emily wrote everything down in a notebook. Not emotional notes, not angry notes, clean notes, date, time, camera angle, description. File name, weather, visible vehicle, visible person, action recorded. Then we photographed the road sign itself, the fresh marks around the screws, the place where the sign had been turned, every tire tracks in the damp gravel, the orange paint marks near the porch, the packet of papers Marlene had left behind, every page, every envelope, every red warning stamp, every place where they used the word fines. Access, compliance, and corrective removal. By midnight, our kitchen table looked like a small law office. The old deed folder sat in the center. Emily had pulled it from the metal cabinet near the fireplace and laid the documents out in careful stacks. There were property tax statements going back decades, handwritten notes from her father, an old survey with faded ink, the original deed, a title policy, and a recorded easement description so dry and technical that most people would fall asleep halfway through the first paragraph. But Emily did not fall asleep. She read every line. I watched her trace the language with her finger. Her father's name, the parcel description, the access route, the words perpetual. Non-exclusive, ingress and egress, and successors and assigns. Those words did not sound dramatic, but sitting at that table after what Marlene had done, they felt like steel. Next morning, Emily called the county clerk's office as soon as it opened. Her voice was polite, but there was nothing soft in it. She requested certified copies of the recorded deed, the easement agreement, the subdivision plat for Pine Hollow Estates, and any amendments to the community map that had been filed since the developer created the HOA. I called the building department and confirmed our repair permit was still active and in good standing. The clerk there recognized the address because I had been in just a few weeks earlier. She confirmed there were no stop work orders, no complaints listed on the parcel, and no county inspection failures. Then I asked if an HOA could override a county repair permit on a parcel outside its recorded boundary. There was a pause on the phone. The clerk said, "Carefully, we cannot give legal advice, but the county does not enforce HOA rules, and an HOA cannot create jurisdiction by sending us a complaint." That sentence went into Emily's notebook. After that, I called a licensed surveyor named Daniel Haskins. He was not the cheapest surveyor in the county, but everyone seemed to know his name. A retired road engineer recommended him. A title company recommended him. Even the woman at the county clerk's office said, off the record, that if someone needed a boundary dispute handled correctly, Daniel was the person who would not guess when I explained the situation. Daniel did not sound surprised. HOA boundary confusion, he said, happens more than people think. But when there's an old easement involved, you want opinions. You want monuments, records, and measurements. He came out 2 days later in a gray county-style truck with tripods, stakes, flagging tape, and a calmness that immediately made Marlene's entire performance seem even more ridiculous. He did not care about the red jacket, the clipboard, the threats, or the HOA badge. He cared about corners, bearings, distances, recorded instruments, and what the land actually said when measured against the documents. He started at the county road. Emily and I followed him while he located old markers near the entrance. Some were buried under leaves. One had nearly disappeared beneath the HOA's decorative landscaping. Another was beside the stone pillar that held the Pine Hollow Estates welcome sign. Daniel stopped there for a long time. He brushed dirt away from the marker, checked his equipment, looked at the plat, then looked at the pillar again. That pillar may be a problem. Wow. He said, "For us?" I asked. He looked over the top of his glasses. "No, for them." Emily did not react, but I saw her grip tighten around the folder in her hands. Daniel spent hours walking the easement corridor. He placed small flags along the route from the county road to the cabin. Red flags, then blue flags, then wooden stakes with pink ribbon where the boundary angles changed. By the time he reached our porch, the lower entrance to Pine Hollow looked different. Not physically, not yet, but legally. The pretty stone sign and manicured shrubs no longer looked like the entrance to a powerful HOA. They looked like objects sitting dangerously close to a line they had ignored for years. At the cabin, Daniel compared the old survey to the current measurements. He checked the cabin footprint. He checked the porch. He checked the setback from the actual property line, not the imaginary red circle Marlene had drawn on her printed map. Finally, he folded his field notes and said, "Your cabin is not in their subdivision." Emily closed her eyes for 1 second. I asked, "You re-sure?" "So I'm sure enough to put my license behind it," he said. "But that is not the part that worries me." He pointed down the hill toward the entrance. "The recorded access easement is older than Pine Hollow Estates. It survived the subdivision. The developer had to build around it. On what I'm seeing, the HOA has placed improvements inside or right against the easement area. Signage, landscaping, possibly the camera post, maybe part of that stonework. I need to finish the drawing, but if my measurements hold, they don't have a right to restrict your access. They may have an obligation to keep that route clear." The air felt different after he said that. Not safe yet, but different. That afternoon, Emily and I went to the county office in person. We did not want screenshots. We wanted certified paper. We wanted stamps, recording numbers, dates and names, the kind of documents no HOA president could wave away with a smirk. At the clerk's counter, we pulled the original subdivision plat for Pine Hollow Estates. It showed the lots, the common area, the roadways, the gate, the entrance corridor, and in faint but unmistakable language, the pre-existing access easement benefiting Emily's family parcel. There it was, not a rumor, not a family story, not an interpretation, a recorded fact. Emily stared at it through the glass on the counter. "My dad knew," she whispered, and he had. It saved everything, because he must have known that someday someone might try to pretend old rights no longer mattered once new houses and new money arrived. We paid for certified copies. We requested the HOA's recorded covenants. We read them in the parking lot before driving home. The covenants were strict: paint colors, mailbox rules, trash cans, fencing, landscaping, vehicles, architectural approval, all the normal HOA machinery. But they applied to lots within Pine Hollow Estates, not our parcel, not the cabin, not Emily's inherited ridgeland. That evening, I created a digital evidence folder with subfolders labeled deed, easement, survey, county permit, HOA letters, HOA emails, trail camera footage, photos, contractor trespass, and timeline. Emily made a physical binder with tabs. She put the certified deed first, the easement second, the plat third, and Marlene's notices behind them. The order mattered. Facts before threats, records before opinions, law before noise. Then we started reviewing every email Marlene had sent. That was where the investigation took another turn. Buried in a message from the HOA treasurer was a sentence that probably was never meant for us. It had been forwarded as part of a longer chain, and Marlene must not have noticed it before sending her final warning. The treasurer had written, "I understand the cabin may not technically be within our recorded restrictions, but Marlene believes we can pressure them through entrance visibility and access concerns." Emily read the line out loud twice. "May not technically be within our recorded restrictions." That meant they knew, or at least someone on the board knew enough to question it. Another email from Marlene said, "If they continue refusing voluntary cooperation, we need to create a strong enforcement record before involving the county. Create a strong enforcement record. Not follow the rules, not verify authority. Create a record." I forwarded that email to myself, printed it, saved it as a PDF, and added it to the binder. Then I called a real estate attorney named Patricia Lowell. I had never hired an attorney for anything like this before. My hands actually felt cold while I dialed the number. Part of me still worried that maybe Marlene had some obscure rule. Some hidden development document, some legal trap we had missed. That was how people like her made you feel, like your own property was only yours until someone more confident said otherwise. Patricia listened for 15 minutes without interrupting. Then she asked 3 questions. Is the easement recorded? Yes. Is the cabin parcel inside the subdivision plat? No. Do you have video of the contractor entering the property before the inspection demand? Yes. There was a silence. Then she said, "Do not speak to the HOA directly again." Those words landed harder than I expected. She told us to send everything: the deed, the easement, the surveyor's preliminary notes, the certified plat, the county permit, the fine notices, the emails, the video clips. The photos of the sign, the orange paint marks, the contractor's license plate, the packet Marlene left behind. From now on, Patricia said, they communicate through my office. If they come back to the property, you document it and call the sheriff's non-emergency line. Do not argue, do not threaten, do not touch anyone. Let the records do the work. That became our rule. Let the records do the work. For the next several days, Marlene kept sending emails. At first, they were aggressive, then impatient, then strangely polished, as if she had realized her words might be read by someone else later. One message said the HOA had historically managed the entrance corridor for more than a decade. Another said the board reserved the right to control access through community-maintained roads. Another warned that failure to acknowledge association oversight could result in expanded enforcement options. I did not answer. Every email went straight to Patricia. Every envelope went unopened into a plastic sleeve until we could photograph it. Every phone call went to voicemail. Marlene left 3 messages in one day. In the first, she sounded irritated. In the second, she sounded angry. In the third, she sounded almost sweet, saying she hoped we could resolve this neighbor to neighbor before unnecessary legal expenses. Emily listened to that one and laughed for the first time in days. She called my father's cabin an eyesore. She said, now we re-neighbors. Daniel finished the formal survey the following week. When the PDF arrived, I opened it at the kitchen table. Emily stood behind me with one hand on my shoulder. The drawing was clean, stamped, and devastating. The cabin sat outside the Pine Hollow Estate's boundary. The porch repair area was within our existing footprint. The access easement was clearly marked. Near the entrance, several HOA improvements appeared to encroach into the easement corridor or narrow it in ways that could interfere with access. Daniel included notes, measurements, and references to the recorded instruments. This was not a shouting match anymore. It was a map. A certified, stamped, professionally prepared map that turned Marlene's entire argument into smoke. Patricia reviewed everything and drafted a demand letter. Before she sent it, she called us and read the main points aloud. The letter demanded that Pine Hollow Estates immediately withdraw all violation notices. Confirm in writing that the cabin was not subject to HOA architectural control. Cease any attempt to inspect or enter the property. Preserve all communications related to the matter. Identify who authorized Ridgeway to enter the property at night. Remove or relocate any improvements interfering with the recorded easement, and reimburse us for survey costs, legal fees, property damage, and related expenses. It also warned that any attempt to block access could lead to emergency injunctive relief. Emily was silent through most of the call. And Patricia reached the final paragraph, the one that referenced the contractor's night visit and the sign being turned. Emily closed her eyes, not because she was scared, because after weeks of being talked down to, threatened, and treated like some obstacle in Marlene's landscaping plan, someone had finally put the truth in language. Marlene could not laugh off. The letter went out by email, certified mail, and courier to the HOA's registered agent. We thought that would be the moment Marlene finally backed down. Instead, she made the mistake that changed the entire case. For 2 days after Patricia's letter was delivered, Marlene replied from her official HOA account. She copied the full board. She copied the property manager. She copied Ridgeway Property Services. And in the middle of that email, she wrote one sentence that Patricia later printed in bold. Pine Hollow Estates has exercised control over that access road and entrance corridor for more than 10 years. We will continue to do so as necessary to protect the community. When Patricia forwarded it to us, she added only one line. She just admitted they have been interfering with a recorded easement. When Patricia Lowe, said Marlene, had just admitted the HOA had been interfering with a recorded easement. I did not understand how big that sentence was. At first, to me, it sounded like another legal phrase. Important, yes, but still buried in the kind of language attorneys use when normal people are already exhausted. Emily understood faster than I did. She had spent nights reading her father's deed, line by line, tracing the old easement description with her finger, learning the words that had protected that cabin long before either of us knew we would need them. Patricia explained it the next morning on a conference call. Marlene thought she was proving history. She thought that by saying Pine Hollow Estates had controlled the entrance corridor for more than 10 years, She was building an argument that the HOA had some kind of practical authority over the road. But the road was not theirs to control. The road was tied to a recorded access easement, and that easement benefited Emily's family parcel. It was older than the HOA, older than the entrance sign, older than the stone pillars, older than the gate camera, older than every rule Marlene had been waving around like a weapon. The developer who built Pine Hollow Estates had purchased land that was already burdened by that easement. That meant the developer, the HOA, and every later owner took their property subject to it. They did not get to erase it because it was inconvenient. They did not get to narrow it because it ruined the look of the entrance. They definitely did not get to threaten to block it as a pressure tactic. Patricia said it plainly. They are treating a recorded property right like a neighborhood courtesy. It is not a courtesy. It runs with the land. Those words changed the entire fight. Before that, Marlene had framed everything as if we were asking for a favor to use the road, a favor to keep the cabin, a favor to repair boards on a porch that had existed for decades. She acted like the HOA was the adult in the room, and we were stubborn outsiders refusing to cooperate. But the deed said the opposite. We were not asking permission. We already had rights, and the HOA had been stepping on them. Patricia broke the case into pieces, and each piece made Marlene's position worse. First, the cabin itself. Daniel Haskins' stamped survey showed the cabin parcel was outside the Pine Hollow Estates subdivision boundary, not near the boundary, not partly inside. Not in some gray area Marlene could dress up as an entrance impact zone. Outside, completely. The porch repair was within the existing cabin footprint, and the county permit was valid. There was no new structure for the HOA to approve, no architectural submission requirement, and no legal basis for fines. Second, the HOA covenants. Patricia had reviewed the recorded covenants herself. Are strict, but they applied to property inside Pine Hollow Estates. They did not magically reach up the ridge to grab a separate parcel because the HOA president disliked seeing old cedar from the road. The phrase Marlene kept using, community visual impact, did not appear in the recorded deed restrictions. It appeared in a newsletter, an architectural guideline, and one of Marlene's own letters. But not in any recorded instrument that touched our land. Third, the map. The red-circled map Marlene had brought to the cabin was not a survey, not a plat, not a legal exhibit, and not a county boundary document. It was a marketing map from the original developer packet, printed years ago to show the general appearance of the community. It used soft green shading and curved labels to make Pine Hollow look like a unified mountain retreat. It was never meant to define property rights. Patricia actually sounded annoyed when she discussed that part. People lose sight of this all the time, she said. A pretty map is not a deed. A brochure is not a boundary. Red marker does not create jurisdiction. Emily smiled for the first time that morning. Fourth, the easement. This was the part that turned the fight from defensive to offensive. Daniel S. survey, the certified deed, and the old subdivision plat all confirmed the same thing. The access road was protected. It did not matter that Pine Hollow maintained landscaping near it. It did not matter that residents drove past it. It did not matter that the HOA decorated around it for years. They could not unilaterally interfere with the access needed to reach our cabin. And according to Daniel S. measurements, they had already interfered. The stone entrance pillar was close enough to the easement corridor to create a clearance issue for larger vehicles. The landscaping wall pushed into the usable shoulder. The new camera post and decorative shrubs narrowed the turn. Even the HOA welcome sign sat in a position that made the road appear to be part of the community entrance instead of a separate access route. That mattered because Marlene had threatened to restrict the road. Once she put that threat in writing, Patricia said, the situation crossed a line. That is not just an annoying HOA letter anymore, she told us. That is a threat to obstruct access to real property. Fifth, the contractor. Ridgeway Property Services had no permission from us, no work order signed by us, no county authorization, and no right to enter the cabin parcel at night. The trail camera footage showed him driving past the private road sign, approaching the cabin with a flashlight, measuring the porch, photographing the permit, marking the frame with orange paint, and turning the sign so it would be less visible from below. Marlene's morning visit made that footage even more damaging, because she arrived the next day with Ridgeway beside her. Already talking about corrective removal. That made his night visit look less like curiosity and more like preparation. Patricia said she could not read minds, but she did not need to. A timeline told its own story. Friday night, contractor enters private property without permission. Saturday morning, HOA president arrives demanding inspection and threatening removal. For a Saturday morning, same contractor estimates how quickly he can take down part of the porch. Monday deadline, HOA demands access and recognition of authority. Then Marlene's written admission. HOA had exercised control over the entrance corridor for years and intended to continue. It was no longer our word against hers. It was documents against documents, and ours were recorded. Patricia drafted a second letter, much sharper than the first. She copied the HOA's registered agent, the property management company, the entire board, their insurance carrier, Ridgeway Property Services, and the county planning office. The subject line alone made my stomach tighten. Notice of easement interference, trespass, unauthorized enforcement activity, and demand for preservation of evidence. The letter stated that Emily S. parcel was not subject to Pine Hollow Estates covenants. It cited the recorded deed and instrument numbers for the easement. It cited the survey. It cited the valid county permit. It demanded the HOA withdraw all alleged violations within 5 business days. Then it went further. It demanded that the HOA preserve all emails, texts, board meeting minutes, contractor communications, invoices, maps, internal discussions, and recordings related to our cabin, our road, the entrance corridor, and the planned inspection. It demanded the name of every person who authorized Ridgeway to enter the property. It demanded written confirmation that no board member, contractor, employee, agent, or resident would enter our cabin parcel without permission. It demanded that the HOA stop representing to residents that our cabin was under HOA control. And it warned that if the HOA made any attempt to block, narrow, gate, barricade, from, or otherwise interfere with the recorded access easement, Patricia would seek emergency court relief, damages, attorney fees, and any other remedy available under law. I had to read that paragraph 3 times. Emergency court relief. That was the first time I realized Marlene had not just overplayed her hand. She had created the kind of paper trail that could bring a judge into the middle of her polished little HOA world. The response did not come from Marlene at first. It came from the property manager, a man named Ellen, who had been copied on half the emails but had never directly spoken to us. His message was short, nervous, and very different from Marlene's tone. He wrote that the management company was reviewing the file and asked Patricia for additional time to consult with association counsel. Patricia replied within 11 minutes. The deadline for withdrawing the violation notices remained unchanged. Any request for additional time did not suspend our rights under recorded easement. After that, the silence from Pine Hollow was almost satisfying. For 2 days, no red letter notices appeared. No golf cart came up the road, no phone calls, no new threats, just silence. Then Mrs. Alvarez called Emily. She sounded shaken. She said Marlene had sent an email blast to the entire neighborhood, accusing an outside property owner of trying to undermine the security and appearance of Pine Hollow Estates. The email claimed the board was taking action to protect residents from unregulated construction activity near the entrance and warned that legal expenses might increase because of non-cooperative adjacent owners. Mrs. Alvarez forwarded it to us. Patricia read it and went quiet. That was never a good sign. Marlene had not named us directly, but she had described the cabin, the entrance, the road, and the dispute clearly enough that everyone in Pine Hollow knew who she meant. She had implied our repairs were unsafe. She had implied we were threatening the community. She had implied the HOA was being forced into legal expenses because we refused to cooperate with legitimate oversight. The problem was that every one of those implications depended on the false idea that the HOA had authority over us. Patricia added the email to the evidence file. Then, a resident we had never met sent something even worse. It was a screenshot from a private board discussion that had accidentally been included in a forwarded chain. In it, Marlene wrote, "If we let them claim that road as private, we lose control of the entrance narrative. We should consider temporary access restrictions until they agree to inspection." Entrance narrative. Emily stared at those words for a long time. Not safety, not law. Narrative. That was what Marlene was protecting. The story she wanted residents to believe. The story that Pine Hollow was perfectly controlled from the gate to the ridge. The story that anything visible from the entrance belonged under her clipboard. The story that old property rights could be talked over, threatened away, or buried under enough HOA letters. But the screenshot also proved she understood the access road was a problem for her. Patricia immediately sent a supplemental notice to the HOA's attorney. Once that attorney finally appeared in the chain, she warned that any access restriction would be treated as intentional interference after actual notice of the recorded easement. The words "after actual notice" mattered. Patricia explained that before, the HOA might try to claim confusion. They might say Marlene misunderstood the boundary. They might say the contractor thought the road was common area. Or might say the board relied on bad maps or old assumptions. But now they had the deed, they had the survey, they had the easement documents, they had the attorney's letter, actual notice. If they kept going after that, it would be much harder to call it a mistake. That was when the HOA's own lawyer finally responded. His letter was careful, very careful. He did not repeat Marlene's claims about community impact zones. He did not call our cabin non-compliant. He did not say the HOA had a right to inspect the interior. He did not defend Ridgeway's night visit. He simply wrote that the association was investigating the matter, and that no enforcement action would be taken while the review was pending. Patricia was not impressed. She replied that pending review was not enough. The notices had to be withdrawn, the fines had to be canceled, the access threats had to stop, and the easement obstruction issues had to be addressed with the county. That last part was important because Patricia had already sent the file to county planning and code enforcement. She did not ask Marlene for permission. She did not wait for the HOA to finish its internal review. She sent the county the certified plat, Daniel's survey, photos of the entrance improvements, the location of the stone pillar, the landscaping wall, the camera post, and the threatening emails about controlling access. The county planning office responded faster than we expected. An officer named Grant called Patricia first, then called us with permission. His voice was calm, official, and almost painfully neutral. But what he said made Emily sit down at the kitchen table. The county still had the original subdivision approval file, and inside that file was a condition placed on the developer before Pine Hollow Estates was approved. Our existing access easement to Emily's family parcel had to remain unobstructed. That condition had not expired. It had not been replaced by HOA rules. It had not disappeared because the entrance landscaping looked nicer without an obvious private road sign. Grant said the county would schedule a site visit. Emily covered her mouth with one hand. For weeks, Marlene had threatened to bring the county down on us. She had used the word county like a hammer, as if inspectors and records existed only to punish people she disliked. The county was coming, but not for our cabin, for the HOA entrance. The night before the site visit, Marlene sent one more email, not to us, because Patricia had blocked that. She sent it to the board and the property manager, but someone forwarded it to Mrs. Alvarez, who forwarded it to Emily. Marlene wrote that the board needed to stand firm because allowing us to weaponize old paperwork would set a dangerous precedent. Old paperwork. Emily read that phrase and laughed softly, but there was no humor in it. Her father's deed was old paperwork. The easement was old paperwork. The subdivision approval was old paperwork. The county plat was old paperwork. And all of it was about to do exactly what old paperwork is supposed to do. Protect the people who had rights before someone with a newer sign tried to erase them. By then, the legal reversal was complete. Marlene had started with a clipboard, a contractor, a fake boundary map, and a threat to fine us into submission. She believed power came from confidence, volume, position, and the ability to make other people feel surrounded. Emily answered with a deed, then a survey, then a permit, then emails, then camera footage, then county records. And once all of those pieces locked together, the story Marlene had built collapsed in one direction only. Back onto the HOA. The morning county officials arrived. Emily placed the certified deed and survey in a folder and set it by the door. She looked at me and said, "My dad kept this cabin safe for 40 years. Today the paper does the talking." The county site visit was scheduled for Thursday morning. At 9, Emily and I arrived at the cabin early. Even though we had barely slept, the air was cold enough that we could see our breath, and a thin layer of fog hung low between the pine trees. I remember standing on the porch with a cup of coffee I could not finish, looking down the gravel road toward Pine Hollow Estates and wondering how many times Emily's father had stood in that same spot, trusting that the paper he saved would be enough if the world ever changed around him. At 8:47, Patricia pulled up in a dark sedan. She was not dramatic. She did not come in swinging with threats or speeches. She stepped out with a leather folder, nodded to Emily, and said, "Let the county do the talking today." Daniel Haskins arrived next, his survey truck loaded with equipment, stakes, maps, and printed copies of the stamped survey. He looked exactly the same as he had during the first survey, calm, patient, and completely uninterested in anyone's ego. Then at 9 on the dot, the county vehicles came up the road. There were 2 of them. One belonged to the planning office. The other was from code enforcement. A deputy sheriff followed behind in a marked SUV, not with lights on, not like a raid, but with the quiet seriousness of someone there to keep a civil dispute from becoming something worse. Marlene Pierce was already waiting near the Pine Hollow entrance when we walked down. She had chosen her battlefield carefully. She stood beside the stone pillar under the polished bronze HOA sign, with 2 board members, the property manager, Ridgway the contractor, and a man in a suit who must have been the HOA attorney. For the first time since I had met her, Marlene was not smiling. She still had a clipboard, but she was not waving it. The county planning officer, Grant, introduced himself to everyone. He did not ask who was upset. He did not ask who had complained first. He did not ask whose property values were allegedly at risk. He opened a folder and asked Daniel to walk the recorded easement. That one sentence changed the temperature of the entire morning. The entrance corridor, not the community impact zone, the recorded easement. Daniel set up his equipment near the county road and began placing flags again, this time with everyone watching. And blue markers appeared along the ground, like the land itself was finally speaking in a language no one could interrupt. Emily stood beside me, arms folded, face still, but I could see her eyes following every flag. Marlene tried to step in almost immediately. "With respect," she said, "the association has maintained this entrance for years, and the disputed cabin creates a visual and safety concern for residents." Grant looked at her politely. "We are not here to evaluate aesthetics." That was the first crack. Marlene blinked, but the board has architectural authority over the entrance presentation. "Not over property outside your recorded jurisdiction," Grant said. The HOA attorney put a hand slightly forward, as if warning Marlene to stop talking. She ignored him. "The cabin affects our entrance," she insisted. Grant looked down at the county file. "The cabin is not the subject of this inspection." That was the second crack. For weeks, Marlene had tried to drag our cabin into the center of the fight. The rotten porch boards, the old windows, the cedar siding, the color, the visibility from the gate. She had built her whole campaign around making the cabin look like a violation. Now the county was standing at her entrance, looking at her sign, her wall, her camera post, and her landscaping. Not our cabin, hers. Daniel walked the first section of the easement and stopped near the stone pillar. He checked the survey, checked his instrument, then placed a flagged stake near the base of the decorative stonework. Grant crouched down, looked at the marker, then looked at the pillar. "How much clearance is this leaving?" he asked. Daniel gave him the measurement. Grant's expression did not change, but the code enforcement officer wrote something down. The landscaping wall was next. It curved beautifully around a bed of shrubs and ornamental grass. I remembered seeing it years before and thinking it looked expensive. That morning, with survey flags pressed against its edge, it looked like evidence. Daniel showed where the easement corridor ran. Part of the wall did not belong where it was. Not because it was ugly, not because we disliked it, because the recorded access route required space. And Pine Hollow had slowly dressed that space up as if decoration could erase an obligation. Then they measured the camera post. That one made the deputy sheriff step closer. The post stood near the turn, angled toward the gate and the lower road. Marlene had used phrases like security, safety, and community access in her emails. But Daniel's survey showed the post narrowed the usable area and made larger vehicles swing wide near the edge of the gravel. Grant asked the property manager whether the camera post had a permit. The property manager looked at Marlene. Marlene looked at the HOA attorney. The attorney answered, "We are still reviewing the installation history. Code enforcement wrote that down too. Then Grant asked about the welcome sign. That was the moment Marlene lost her composure. The sign has been there for more than a decade, she said. No one objected before. It is part of the established entrance design. Patricia finally spoke. My client's lack of prior litigation did not grant the HOA permission to interfere with a recorded easement. Marlene turned toward her. We have never blocked them. Patricia opened her folder. Your email threatened temporary access restrictions if they refused inspection. The HOA attorney said, we are not conceding. That was an official board action. Patricia looked at him. It was sent from the HOA President's official account after the association had already issued violation notices and sent a contractor to the property. Deputy Sheriff, who had been quiet, asked one question. Contractor went to the cabin. Patricia handed him a printed still from the trail camera. Then another. Then another. Ridgway's face changed before the deputy even finished looking. Marlene said quickly, that was a preliminary exterior assessment. The deputy looked up. At night? No one answered. He looked at Ridgway. Did you have permission from the cabin owners to go up there? Ridgway rubbed the back of his neck. I was told the HOA had authority over the corridor. Did you have permission from the owners? The deputy repeated. Ridgway did not look at Marlene this time. No. Emily inhaled sharply beside me, but she did not say anything. The deputy looked at the still showing Ridgway turning the private road sign. What were you doing here? Ridgway swallowed. I didn't remove it. That was not my question. The silence that followed was the kind that makes people choose between loyalty and liability. First, Ridgway chose himself. I was asked to document access conditions before the board meeting, he said. I thought it was part of the HOA area. Marlene's head snapped toward him. That is not accurate. The HOA attorney quietly said her name, low and firm. But it was too late. The neat little story was falling apart in front of everyone. Grant asked to see the HOA's records for the entrance improvements. The property manager produced a binder, but it was thin where it should have been thick. There were invoices for landscaping, maintenance records, a proposal for camera upgrades, an old approval note for sign refurbishment, but there was no clear county permit for the wall extension, no easement release, no recorded agreement from Emily's father, no document showing the HOA had the right to narrow, decorate, control, or threaten the access road. By late morning, code enforcement had enough. The officer issued a written notice requiring Pine Hollow Estates to address possible encroachments and unpermitted improvements within the easement corridor. The HOA was ordered to submit documentation, remove or relocate obstructions if required, and stop any interference with access during the review. Failure to comply could result in daily fines. I watched Marlene read the notice. For weeks, she had imagined handing papers to us. Now a county officer was handing papers to her, and she looked smaller holding them. The deputy did not arrest anyone. That was never the point. But he did take a report regarding the unauthorized entry, the sign alteration, and the threat to restrict access. He told Ridgway not to return to our property unless he had written permission from the owners or lawful authority. Then he looked at Marlene and said the same applied to the HOA board and its agents. Marlene tried one last time. Deputy, this is a civil HOA matter, he nodded. Then keep it civil by staying off their property. That line ended the site visit more effectively than any shouting could have, but the real collapse happened a week later at the Pine Hollow Public Board meeting. Patricia advised us not to speak unless necessary, but she said we had every right to attend because Marlene's email blast had made the dispute a community issue. So Emily and I sat in the back of the clubhouse while residents filled the room around us. Some looked curious, some looked angry, some would not look at us at all. Marlene sat at the front table with the board. No red jacket this time, just a pale blouse, a tight mouth, and a stack of papers she kept rearranging without reading. The meeting started with the treasurer discussing legal expenses. That was when the room shifted. HOA drama is one thing when it feels like someone else's problem. It becomes another thing entirely when residents realize the bill might land in their dues. A man in the second row raised his hand. Are we being sued because of the cabin? The HOA attorney answered before Marlene could. There is an active property rights dispute involving an adjacent parcel and a recorded access easement. The association is working to resolve the matter. A woman near the front asked, is the cabin actually in our HOA? No one answered immediately. That silence did more damage than any speech. Finally, the attorney said, "Based on current records, the cabin parcel does not appear to be subject to the Pine Hollow Estates covenants." The room erupted. Not screaming, worse than screaming. Controlled anger, whispering, chairs shifting. People turning to each other with that look homeowners get when they realize bored confidence may have just turned into financial exposure. As Oliver stood up. "Then why did we receive an email saying the owner was non-cooperative and creating safety concerns?" Marlene leaned toward the microphone. "The board acted to protect the community entrance." A man from the back said, "By sending a contractor onto someone else's land at night?" That question hit the room like thunder. Marlene's face went white. The attorney said, "We are not discussing personnel or vendor matters in open session." But residents were already looking at Ridgway's company invoice in the packet someone had clearly obtained. Another homeowner asked whether the HOA insurance would cover intentional trespass. Another asked whether the board had voted on the inspection demand. Another wanted to know why an easement shown on the original subdivision documents had been ignored. Then the insurance representative stood. I did not even know she was there until that moment. She introduced herself as a representative reviewing the association's claim notice. Her statement was short, careful, and devastating. She said the carrier was reserving rights pending investigation, and that coverage could be limited for intentional acts, knowing violations or enforcement activity outside the association's authority. Most people in the room probably did not understand every insurance term, but they understood enough. Could be limited. Intentional acts. Outside authority. That meant if Marlene had knowingly pushed the HOA into a fight, it had no right to start. The association might not be fully protected. The treasurer put his face in his hands. For the first time, Marlene had no speech ready. Patricia stood then, not to argue, but to place the evidence into the meeting record. She identified the recorded deed, the access easement, Daniel's survey, the county permit, the trail camera stills, the email threatening access restrictions, the email admitting the cabin may not be within recorded restrictions, the county notice, and the demand that all fines and violations be withdrawn. She did not call Marlene names. She did not need to. The documents did that quietly. By the end of the meeting, 3 board members publicly distanced themselves from Marlene's actions. Todd, the man who had filmed us on the porch, admitted he had believed Marlene had already confirmed legal authority before the visit. The treasurer said he had warned against escalating without counsel. The property manager said the management company had not advised entering the cabin parcel. Every person who had stood behind Marlene began taking one step away from her. That was the final reversal. At the cabin, she had tried to surround us with a board member, a contractor, papers, threats, and a camera. In the clubhouse, surrounded by her own residents, she was the one standing alone. 2 days later, Patricia received written confirmation that all violation notices and fines were suspended pending formal withdrawal. The HOA also agreed not to enter our parcel, not to contact us directly, not to interfere with the access road, and to cooperate with the county review. But Patricia told us not to celebrate yet. Suspended was not canceled. Cooperate was not comply. And Marlene had already shown us that people who build power from intimidation rarely give it up the first time the truth walks into the room. The county had opened the door. The documents had shifted the power. Now the only question was how much Pine Hollow Estates would have to lose before it finally admitted the cabin had never belonged to them at all. The final letter from Pine Hollow Estates did not come from Marlene. That was how we knew it was serious. It came on the HOA attorney's letterhead, copied to Patricia, the property manager, the county planning office, the insurance representative, and every board member. The language was careful, polished, and completely stripped of the arrogance Marlene had used from the beginning. The association formally withdrew all violation notices against our cabin. Every fine was canceled. Every demand for inspection was revoked. The letter confirmed that Emily's cabin parcel was not subject to the Pine Hollow Estates covenants, but under HOA architectural control, and not part of any entrance corridor enforcement program. It also confirmed that no board member, contractor, agent, employee, or vendor of the HOA would enter our property without written permission or lawful authority. Emily read that paragraph 3 times. Then she set the letter on the kitchen table. Walked outside and stood on the porch her father built. She did not cheer, she did not cry. She just stood there with one hand on the railing, looking down the ridge toward the entrance where all of this had started. I think some victories are too heavy to celebrate right away. Sometimes after weeks of being threatened, mocked, and treated like a trespasser on your own land, peace does not feel like joy at first. It feels like your body finally realizing it can breathe again. But Pine Hollow's problems were not over. The county completed its review and issued a corrective order. HOA had to remove or relocate anything that interfered with the recorded access easement. That meant the decorative landscaping wall had to be cut back. The camera post had to be moved. Several shrubs had to be removed. The entrance sign had to be shifted away from the easement corridor. And the stone pillar, the same polished entrance feature Marlene loved to stand beside like it proved her authority, had to be partially dismantled and rebuilt outside the protected access area. For years, residents had driven past that entrance, believing it was a symbol of control. Now it was surrounded by orange cones, any notices, work crews, and survey flags. The irony was almost too perfect. Marlene had threatened to have our porch torn apart. In the end, her HOA had to tear apart its own entrance. Ridgeway Property Services lost its HOA maintenance contract. The board announced it as a vendor transition, but everyone knew what it meant. Patricia also sent the trail camera footage and the sign alteration evidence to the contractor licensing board. I do not know every consequence he faced after that, but I know he sent a written apology through his attorney and reimbursed us for the damaged sign, the orange paint cleanup, and the security camera replacements we installed afterward. We never came near our cabin again. The financial settlement took longer. Patricia negotiated with the HOA's attorney and insurance carrier for weeks. We did not get some movie-style fortune, and we were not looking for one. What we wanted was simple. Our legal costs covered, Daniel's survey paid for, the damage repaired, the easement protected, and the HOA forced to put in writing that it had no authority over Emily's cabin. In the end, they paid for the survey, reimbursed a large portion of our attorney's fees, covered the property damage, paid for the new signage, and signed a binding agreement recognizing the recorded easement and our right to use the road without interference. The agreement also required Pine Hollow to update its internal maps, so future board members could not pretend the cabin was part of their control area that mattered to Emily more than the money. She did not want to win only once. She wanted the records corrected so nobody would have to fight this same battle again 20 years later. Then came the special HOA meeting. Ms. Alvarez called us afterward and told us the room was packed. Homeowners were furious, not because they loved our cabin. Most of them had probably never thought about it before Marlene turned it into a crisis. They were furious because their HOA dues had been dragged into a legal fight over property the HOA never controlled. They were furious because Marlene had sent community-wide emails that made the situation sound like a safety issue, when the real issue was her trying to force authority where none existed. The vote was not close. Marlene Pierce was removed as HOA president. 2 board members resigned the same night. The property manager stayed, but only after the new board required legal review before any future enforcement action involving boundary lines, easements, or adjacent properties. A month later, Emily and I drove up to the cabin with a new sign in the back of my truck. It was simple, clean, and impossible to misread private cabin. Recorded access easement. No HOA authority. We mounted it between the same 2 pine trees where her father's old sign had been twisted in the dark. Emily held the level while I tightened the screws when it was done. She stepped back and looked at it for a long time. Then she reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out a small folded piece of paper. It was a copy of the deed paragraph. The same paragraph she had tapped on the hood of Marlene's golf cart. She had laminated it. I laughed when I saw it. She said, "What? Seems like the cabin likes having backup." That afternoon we finished replacing the porch boards, not because Marlene had forced us to, not because an HOA had approved it. Because the county permit was valid, the property was ours, and the cabin deserved to be cared for. When the last board was screwed down, Emily sat on the steps and ran her hand along the cedar grain. His dad would have hated all this, she said. Then she looked down toward Pine Hollow's entrance, where the rebuilt sign now sat several feet farther away from the easement line. but he would have loved that the deed worked. That stayed with me, because this story was never really about a porch. It was not about paint colors, entrance views, or whether an old cabin matched someone else's idea of a perfect gated community. It was about the kind of person who sees someone else's boundary and treats it like an obstacle instead of a legal line. Marlene thought power meant showing up louder, bringing more people, using official-looking paper and saying the word compliance until ordinary people got scared enough to surrender. Emily proved something else. Power can be a folder in a metal cabinet, a deed saved by a careful father, a surveyor willing to measure what everyone else wanted to assume, a camera recording what arrogant people thought no one would see, a calm attorney writing one sentence that changes the entire direction of a fight. We did not win because we shouted louder than Marlene. We won because we stayed calm long enough to find the facts, save the evidence, read the deed, call the county, hire the right professionals, and let the records speak in a room where her attitude could not protect her anymore. The cabin is still there. The porch is stronger now. The road is clear. The easement is marked. Every time we drive past the Pine Hollow entrance, Emily looks at the shifted sign and smiles just a little. Not because we wanted revenge, because the line held. And sometimes, when someone tries to take control of what was never theirs, the most satisfying revenge is not breaking the rules. It is knowing them better. If you have ever dealt with an HOA, a neighbor, or anyone who tried to bully their way across your property line, leave your thoughts in the comments. Share this story with someone who needs a reminder to keep their records, read their deed, and protect their boundaries the right way. And subscribe for more stories about ordinary people who stayed calm, gathered proof, and let the law turn the whole situation around.